Hey everybody, Elizabeth Nader back with you, Jersey First TV and the Nader Narrative. We're talking about taxes again in New Jersey. When are we not talking about taxes in New Jersey? This is sort of the ubiquitous issue that all of us in New Jersey have everywhere we turn: taxes, taxes, taxes. But other states are solving this problem. Even other blue states are addressing the high tax rates, but we don't seem to be doing that quite yet here in New Jersey. But we need to understand the problem before we can fix it. And it's a more complex than many people get. So today we're going to bring on a very smart person to help us understand the whole tax issue countrywide, what other states are doing, what we can be doing. And I want to welcome Janelle Fritts to the show. Janelle, thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to talk with you.
Appreciate you. You are a policy analyst with the Tax Foundation's Center for State Tax Policy, which means you spend every day analyzing what every state is doing in their tax structure. So you are definitely the person to talk to. You're also the lead researcher on the annual State Business Tax Climate Index, for which we failed miserably, as you well know, here in New Jersey. And you also helped author the pro-growth tax reform for Oklahoma specifically. Many other things that you do. Okay, so we appreciate you, Janelle. But let's talk about, in general, before we get to New Jersey, what's going on nationwide? I keep hearing other states are addressing, especially their business tax issue, right? But looking at the structure of all their taxes, give us a sense for what the trend is nationwide.
Right, so you're absolutely right. There is a bunch of action going on nationwide on the state level in terms of making tax climates better for both businesses and for individuals. 2021 and 2022 were kind of record years for this, actually. States were in a really good place coming out of the pandemic. They had a lot of money in their coffers, and combined with the fact that people are more mobile than they ever have been, the rise of remote work has really made that front and center in states' mind. They really wanted to stay competitive. So a bunch of states cut either their personal income taxes or their business income taxes, and in many cases, both. So in 2021, there were actually, what's the number there? We had 17 states who reduced their corporate or individual income taxes. And then in 22, we had 13 states, which is very close. And there is actually a good amount of overlap between those two. So a couple states did that in both years. There's a lot of action going on in states. They really want to make sure that they're staying competitive and being as attractive as they can be, both for businesses and for residents.
Now, can we make this not a partisan issue? I mean, or are we really looking at red states doing this, or is there a mix?
I would say it's more prevalent in red states, but I would say that there is a mix. Yeah, I'm trying to think of which states are red and blue states.
It's a good question, right? Because because it's not, it seems to always be tied to the political issue. And I think people in New Jersey feel like, all right, we've been blue for so long. We're a blue state. I disagree with that. It appears we are, but I don't think we really are in our heart. But really, why does this have to divide on partisan lines? This is really about creating a good business atmosphere. This is about creating a good job atmosphere and really standard of living. I'm going to pull up let's look from the business tax standpoint, because one of the things that's really important, and Janelle, this drives your business tax structure and your business environment drives standard of living, right? So how important is it that this is done well?
Right. So when it comes to taxes, they really affect every area of life. And a lot of what you said, as in like quality of living and just how strong your state economy is. And the stronger your state economy is, the more jobs you're going to have, the more people you're going to attract, the more opportunity you're going to have for the people in your states. So the map that we're looking at right now is our State Business Tax Climate Index, which is where we look at the state tax codes of all 50 states, and we compare them based on a number of factors. We don't just look at how much states bring in, we also look at how they bring that in, because that can really have an impact. Depending on how you design your tax code, you could have two states that are bringing in the same amount of money in tax collections. But if one state is doing it in a way that really targets specific industries or is giving some businesses tax breaks over others, that can really affect business decisions. And it can be a lot more damaging to your economy than, say, a broad, flat base with a very low rate. And that's kind of what we're looking at here.
Okay, so as we look visually at this, just look at the colors, everybody, for a moment. We're going to see the dark blue is your best business tax climate. and the gray is your worst. Of course, New Jersey is in the dark gray, worst business tax climate. And we know we ended up in the bottom of the recent analysis of that. So then I'm going to layer over that just real quickly. So everybody look at that. And in this case, blue is good, right? Now let's take a look at the migration. Now, this is the direct impact on people where they want to live, right? Where they're moving. Now, COVID affected a lot of migration outbound of states, inbound, based on COVID policies. We know that that played a factor, but it certainly backs into the business tax environment and the tax environment in general. And what we're seeing here are the blue states in this are the inbound migration top states for that. I'm surprised Tennessee isn't on there, but I'm sure it's very close. And then you see outbound, with the gold. So this actually almost matches the other one related to taxes, doesn't it?
There is a lot of overlap there. And yeah, as you said, there are obviously multiple reasons why people move. Taxes are not always front of mind for them, but they really do have an impact, even if it's not first in someone's mind. Like I was saying before, if your state economy is really strong, it's going to create a lot more jobs, it's going to create opportunity, and people are going to see that, and they're going to want to be a part of that. And a lot of that is what's happening on that map right there. We're seeing people moving from states with a high cost of living, and often that means higher taxes, and they're moving to states with lower cost of living and lower taxes. And yes, you did mention Tennessee. That's number 11 on the list. So it was very, very close to being in the top 10.
Yeah, I figured it was. It's one of my personal favorites. So I want to know some success stories, because you spend a lot of time looking at what different states are doing, and hopefully we will learn from some of the best practices. Let's start with a few states that are doing things right. Give us some examples.
Right. So one that I really want to bring up, and they are actually still kind of on the lower end of the state business tax climate index, but they have been making really important progress. And it was really a bipartisan effort, which was something you mentioned before. So I really want to drive it home. And that would be Louisiana. The state had pretty high rates, but back in 2021, they passed a really comprehensive tax reform package where they ended up bringing down their rates for their personal income tax really significantly. They're down to 4.25% now. They were pretty high before, and 4.25 is very competitive among states. So that's an excellent move on their part. They also brought down their corporate income taxes, and they've put some tax triggers in place where when they reach certain revenue benchmarks, then they will continue to bring those rates down. And that was really a bipartisan project. The votes on those bills were unanimous. And then they had to bring those to voters because they had some constitutional changes, and voters said, yes, we are absolutely in support. Go ahead and do this. So that would be one that I would really highlight.
So it would be fun to watch now Louisiana in terms of their ability to attract businesses moving there, right? Which then, as we said before, has this effect of then the job market improves, standard of living improves, options improve, people stay there or move back or whatever it is. So it's this cascading effect. In New Jersey, we are experiencing the opposite. We are experiencing businesses leaving, right? And in terms of money, we have a whole bunch of COVID dollars we haven't done anything with. So on the one hand, people want to claim, well, the budget is huge and we're overspending. There's no money. We need the money. But then we have these COVID dollars. But let's talk about that for a moment in terms of, and I want to get back to some other states, but I do want to talk about what drives taxes, because I think people have a tendency just to look at this whole issue. They look at the corporate taxes. They think that's only, well, big corporations. No, it's small businesses, and it affects mom and pop, and it affects all of us. They also look at property taxes like a black box. Like, I don't understand that, but all I know is it's super high in New Jersey. And why is that? So in general, let's start at sort of the top of the pyramid. What is driving in most states the tax structure?
I mean, when you look at a really high level, when we're talking about what makes taxes happen and why are taxes different in different states, it all kind of depends on what do you want your state and local government to look like? How many services do you want to offer? What do you want that to look like? And in some states, they've decided they want a smaller government with fewer services, but also a bit more freedom in terms of how you spend your own money, less if it's going to taxes. And it's kind of neat that we do have this 50-state system in which different states can try different things, and people can kind of vote with their feet. If they like what a different state is doing and they don't think that they really need all the services that their state is giving them in exchange for the amount of money that they're paying, then they can pack up and move to a different state. And I mean, with that migration map before, that is absolutely what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's interesting because one thing I've always heard people say about New Jersey is that we're sort of willing to pay more taxes because we get more in return. But that isn't really true in the past few years. Our infrastructure is crumbling. You're not here, so you don't drive our roads, but I can tell you that our infrastructure is definitely crumbling. We've, seen a lot of issues. COVID, of course, pulled the blanket back on a lot of
Right.
states in terms of their issues. And infrastructure isn't just always roads and bridges; it's also technology investments and things that for us were clearly an issue. Our DMV here is a nightmare, right? And we had people, on the sidewalk at 3 a.m. during COVID waiting in line to get. So we saw what happened in terms of not investing. So I think for years, New Jerseyans have been convinced that, all right, higher taxes, I'm getting more services. And maybe at the local level in some of the towns that really carry the higher property tax, they are feeling like they are, but statewide, it's definitely not true. So when you look at that change in terms of how we're living our lives here, isn't it spending? Aren't we out of focused on an out of control spending budget?
Yeah, and there are only so many things that you can do from the tax side of things to solve a state's issues. I mean, we try and focus on those, and there are generally a lot of structural things that states can do to make things better. I think that New Jersey is one of those states where you can make some structural changes to improve things. But at the end of the day, you also do have to look at the other half of the equation because that's kind of driving how much you have to bring in taxes. That drives how creative are you in what tax structures you're making. Are you
Right.
really trying to get that last dollar, or are you trying to think about what's best for the economy of the state and what's best for the residents?
As you look at property taxes, and let's talk about residential because corporate's another one, but let's look at residential property taxes. In New Jersey, we're known to be among the highest in the nation. What's really driving that? And in other states where they're able to, I was looking at in Tennessee, for example, at acreage of land with a home on it, I was shocked at how low the property taxes were. I mean, almost negligible compared to what they are in New Jersey. So, in general, what is driving property taxes?
So, property taxes are by and large a local tax going towards local spending. And the biggest cost that most localities have is education. So, your education budget is really going to affect how much you need to bring in property taxes. Different localities obviously bring in different amounts and they spend things differently. Oftentimes, the state does help out with those education costs, but different states help out in different amounts. So different places will rely on their property taxes either more heavily or less heavily. So that's part of what's going on there. But obviously you also have costs like police and fire and other local spending, but education is usually the largest chunk of that budget.
So recently, the governor changed the homestead tax credit that we get here in New Jersey, and it's based on income and all of that. But he didn't give any relief to corporations as it relates to property taxes. I don't think people often remember or think about the fact that's also a burden on corporations. And why is that important?
Right. I'm really glad that you brought that up because property taxes are actually generally the biggest tax burden that businesses have. Just because oftentimes in states, there are things like homestead exemptions, there are things like different assessment ratios for owner occupied property versus business property. And usually what that means is that businesses take the brunt of the property taxes. While they're not necessarily getting the same benefit from those services as homeowners, they don't really take advantage of the education system like homeowners
Right.
do. So there is a bit of a disconnect there based on who is paying the most in property taxes and who is actually benefiting from them. And oftentimes in states, New Jersey is one of these states, they include some what we call tangible personal property and their property taxes. So those are things like machinery and equipment, things that can be touched or moved. And generally, that's only taxed for businesses. So businesses in New Jersey, they have taxes on those things. They have taxes on inventory, and that can create a really big burden for a lot of very specific businesses.
Oh my gosh, it's really incredible the way they've structured it here.
Right.
I want to go to the personal income tax for a little bit because I think it's interesting. It would be interesting to interview people who have moved out of a state like New Jersey and into a state like Florida with no income tax. So you say, how does Florida do that? So what is life like when you move from this high income tax, right, to now, is it based on consumption? How does Florida specifically do that? How does life change for you as a consumer and an individual now that you don't have an income tax, but you're obviously paying it somewhere?
Right. Yeah, so in terms of Florida, obviously, like you said, they don't have an income tax. So that's points in their favor in a lot of people's minds. They do have to make up that revenue from somewhere.
Right.
They're not spending as much as New Jersey, so they don't have to make up quite as much. What really ends up happening in Florida is that they make that up through the sales tax. They have relatively high sales tax rates, but their collections on the sales tax really help fill their coffers, mostly because Florida is a big tourism state. When people come into Disney or they come into other
Yeah.
places to spend the weekend or a week or just to get away from Northeast winter, that's really helping out the state of Florida. So they can afford to bring in all that money through sales taxes. Not every state has that same thing going for them. It's important to note that not every state can do that same thing. Some states cannot afford to get rid of their income taxes right now, and that's completely fine. But you have to make sure that the taxes that you do have are structured in the best way possible, where you're making sure not to pick winners and losers. You're making sure that you're doing it very simply, very transparently, and making sure that your revenues are stable.
Have you guys ever done research on how consumers or residents of states feel and prefer income tax versus consumption tax? Generally speaking, do people react favorably to one over the other? Or is it just totally dependent, like you said, on the state and their ability to continue to produce the revenue so that people can have the services? I mean, I'm curious what the average consumer prefers.
Yeah, we really have not looked at consumer opinion of these different taxes, but I think it is interesting to note that one of the principles that we really encourage at the Tax Foundation is transparency in taxes, and consumption taxes tend to be a lot more transparent than income taxes, just because every time that you buy something, you can see that tax right on the receipt.
Yeah.
So that's something where it's like, oh, I know exactly what I'm paying. I know what I paid it for. However, no one really keeps all of their receipts and adds up all their sales tax at the end of the year. So it's not like they have that in their mind. But when it comes to property taxes, those are extremely transparent.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what they paid in property taxes this year, and they feel it very strongly.
Yeah.
So even though in general, we do actually think of the property tax as a relatively efficient tax, except when it gets into that disconnect between businesses and what they're gaining from it. When it comes to taxpayers who are living in the area gaining benefits from the localities that are in the area, that's a pretty good tax. But it is extremely transparent, so people tend to feel a lot more strongly about property taxes than other taxes.
Oh, yes,
so
definitely. And I think what's interesting about the consumption tax is, in theory, it's a choice, right? So you feel as though you have some measure of control based on what you spend versus income tax and certainly property tax. Another interesting component of property tax, and I think, again, COVID has really shone the light on so many dark areas. New Jersey was always proud of its education system and really one of the best in the country. So again, people willing to pay the higher taxes to support a better education system. Maybe not so much anymore. We've had major issues with our public schools and choices made through COVID, and really now some insight into what's being taught, how it's being taught, whatever. And I think all the test scores that are plummeting, and this is beyond your, where you focus, but it's an interesting psychological aspect now for people to say, well, wait a minute, I was willing to pay this. We're paying this. We sort of accept that. In return, we thought we had the best of, and do we really have the best of anymore? I think we're at a crisis there in New Jersey as well, which really should be pushing us to look at some changes. Give me one more state before we go. Another state example. You gave us Louisiana, which was a bipartisan approach, and now hopefully we're going to see the good results of that. Give us one more illustration of a state who's doing a good job in addressing their tax structure.
Yeah, I would say that Iowa has made extremely good strides in recent years. They started thinking about tax reform back in 2018, and in past years, they really accelerated that plan. They used to have one of the highest corporate income tax rates in the nation. They have been steadily dropping that. That is extremely impressive of them. They've also been working on their individual income tax. I think that we're going to see a lot of movement in Iowa. I think that they're putting themselves in a lot better place than they used to be. So in terms of states to watch, I would definitely put Iowa on the list.
Who would have thought? I love that. Iowa's just kind of a sleeper. You don't think about it, but that's great that they're solving problems and putting something forward that hopefully we can watch. We're hoping that New Jersey pays attention, right? And we're trying to get the attention of our governor and others to say, guys, we have to solve this. Janelle, I give you a lot of credit for focusing on taxes every single day. I'm not sure I could do that. It would probably be a little much for me after a while, but we really need people like you who are, looking at it closely and showing us best practices and giving us ideas of what we can implement. So I hope New Jersey listens, and I hope that we are on a trend towards solving some of these issues. We will have you back. We appreciate everything you guys do and the intelligence. So we'll have you back in the future to keep New Jerseyans educated on this issue. And hopefully, Janelle, someday you'll tell a good story about us. How's that?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I would love to see New Jersey make some good strides forward. They've been in the same place for quite a while, and with so many states making improvements, if you're not moving forward, you are falling behind. So I would love to see New Jersey get on board with these tax reforms.
You and I both. Let's hope that happens. And to the audience, guys, we'll see you next week. Janelle, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.